Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai, koia nei te reo irarangi o Waiheke, tō totohi nui o ngā kaitono rohi poti o Auckland Central. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Waiheke Radio. This is an Island Life special. This is the great Waiheke Radio Auckland Central Candidates Debate. I want to thank the people who have joined us here in Artworks Theatre, the people who are listening on Waiheke Radio and the people watching on Facebook Live. And a special welcome to the candidates on stage who I will ask to introduce themselves in just a moment. But thanks very much for joining us. Chloe Swarbrick from the Greens, Mahesh Muralidhar from National and Oscar Sims from Labour. So this candidates debate is very much unashamedly local. It's focused on electorate issues and in particular Waiheke issues. There's lots of debates where you can hear what parties have to say, so we're focusing on the local. We have also, of course, we recognise that there is a wide diversity of political views and opinions on the island. So we've also been interviewing candidates who either live on the island or have been campaigning on the island for both Auckland Central and the Tamaki Makaurau electorates. And those candidate interviews are available at www.waihekeradio.org.nz, so we urge you to go and check out those one-on-one interviews as well. So tonight we're going to hear from each of our candidates. We're going to have a number of questions. We've had people submit some questions. We'll roll through those. And then we're going to give the candidates some time at the end to sum up and let us know what they think of has been raised by the other candidates and by people here in the audience tonight. So I reckon we should rock on into it. Just before I ask the candidates to their opening address, I think there'll be many. Some of us are political junkies and we avidly follow this stuff, but there'll be some who perhaps don't know who the candidates are. So I'm just going to ask them very briefly to give a bit of a kind of a thumbnail sketch of who they are. If they were overseas, there wasn't an election going on, they bumped into someone at a cafe and they wanted to let them know a little bit about themselves in 30 seconds, how would they do that? I think your microphones will be okay distance. You might need to pull them back up a little bit, but you can keep an eye on our mixer guy here. He'll tell you if you need to move your mic in close. Chloe, you can begin.
Is this all right? You got me? All right. Kia ora tātou I hoa ma. My name is Chloe Swarbrick. I've had the honour and privilege of the last 3 years representing you as your MP for Auckland Central. I am a Green, and what that means is that I fundamentally stand for the values of people and planet, and I'm really proud of the work that I've done with many members of the community who are here tonight and many who are also not here. I wanted to acknowledge Kath as the chair of the local board, Claire from the CAB, the mahi that we did in organising against the austere budget proposals out of Auckland Council, and many others as well. And I, prior to becoming the Auckland Central MP, had the privilege of also spending another 3 years as a Green List MP, and as is the case when you're in a smaller party, hold a number of different portfolios. Prior to that, have a background academically in philosophy and law, and ran a number of different small businesses.
Cool. Thanks for that. And now some of the other candidates who perhaps aren't will be as familiar to people in the electorate. Mahesh.
Testing, can you hear me? Great, perfect. My name is Mahesh Muralidhar. I'm your National Party candidate for Auckland Central. A brief intro to me. I came to New Zealand on my own when I was 14 from Singapore to Napier in 1994. I came to Auckland City and Auckland Central in 1997. Spent a decade in the city, living, loving it, went to university, did stats and management, and really grew up in this city. Like a lot of young Kiwis, went overseas, worked in professional services, did an MBA, and after that got into entrepreneurship. I was one of the first leaders at a very successful technology business called Canva, and then went on to hold some senior executive positions at a wide variety of other tech companies. I told my wife 10 years ago that I wanted to come back home and serve this electorate that I love so much and this country, because this is the place that really made me who I am. And that's exactly what I'm doing. It's been an absolute privilege so far, learning about Auckland Central's challenges even deeper and closer, and I'm putting my hand up to be your Auckland Central MP, a National Party Member of Parliament in a National Party-led government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Oscar, your turn to introduce yourself.
Kia ora. My name is Oscar Sims. I am a software engineer by trade, so you can kind of think of me a little bit as a blend of both of the other two candidates. You have Chloe, who is young, so I'm 25. I'm actually the youngest candidate on the stage this evening. And like Mahesh, I have also been involved in the technology industry as a professional for the last few years, so I've worked in a diverse range of different roles or different companies in my time during the tech industry. I worked in artificial intelligence, which is obviously one of the big interesting questions facing us in the future now. I've worked in anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, which is another sort of interesting area of a mix between policy and software engineering. Broadly, though, as in terms of my political background, I've been involved over the last few years in two different things. So the first is housing advocacy and housing activism. I was the spokesperson for a national not national, but a nationwide housing policy organisation called the Coalition for More Homes. Well, actually bipartisan or multi-partisan organisation seeking to build more houses, improve the urban design of Auckland and of our major cities, and build a more livable place and more affordable country. The other thing I've been doing is I was on the executive committee of the City Centre Residents Group and really heavily involved in local advocacy there. Obviously, that's not Waiheke, but I've also had connections to this place. My grandmother lived here for many years. My father went to school on the island. I spent many, many happy summers on Onitangi Beach, getting absolutely fried and not in that way, not in his way, not like that. But getting very sunburned, and a big concern for me these days is I've got no hair. So very proud to be standing.
Thank you, Oscar.
Very proud to be standing for the Labour Party at this election.
Okay, thank you. All right. So of course, in these things, sticking to time is always helpful, and at least two of you are used to being told what to do by someone called Chris. Okay? So I asked each of the candidates to have a think about what they believe is the most pressing issue facing the people of Waiheke, and how they would go about addressing that issue if they were our electorate MP. So we're going to give them some time to speak to that now. Up to 3 minutes, and you'll get your 30-second countdown, and we'll let you know when we reach the end. So we'll kind of alternate how we roll through these things, I think. So you're welcome to use the stand here or from where you're seating. I don't mind. It's up to you. So Mahesh, we'll start with you.
Sure. So the most pressing issue I think Waiheke has is there's a real opportunity to have a lot more strategic alignment across the electorate, right? Because across the area, because we're not clear about what are the key gaps we have. So one of the key issues is housing, for example. But how do we set Waiheke up to be sustainable, economically sustainable? What are the gaps we have in regards to Waiheke? I see Waiheke, and the way I look at Waiheke is it's its own autonomous economy in many ways, because it's disconnected from the mainland, and we need to perceive it that way. It's hard to get in, so we need to understand how do we set this wonderful area up sustainably. What is the level of housing we need? What are the level of professionals we need? What are the level of how much will things cost? What is the level of income? So let's just break it down very quickly. When the National Party comes in, we're going to do some city deals with different councils. And one of the key deals will be with Auckland City Council. And that is a real opportunity at that point to call out how many teachers do we need? How many doctors do we need? How many nurses do we need? What are the emergency services, utilities, retail, commerce? Let's actually create that stamp. Then how do we make sure that there's enough commerce coming through the community sustainably? What is the level we need in the first year, in the second year, for a 10,000 people population, for 11,000 people population? We need to clarify this, because without this clarity, we're always working in the blind. So I'd like to work with the steering committee, with Kath and other leaders to make this really clear so that we can negotiate this and make sure that we've got enough private investment as well as government funding to make sure that the community is set up economically, long-term, sustainably.
Thank you. And interesting kind of, hearing a little ripple of around where you talked about the population of the island and so on. So we might want to pick up on that later, and commerce as well, I think, is something we should explore more. Oscar.
Sure. So I would categorise my top concern for Waiheke under the umbrella of affordability. I think this place is not affordable to live, and I think there are sort of two major components to that. So the first is housing is too expensive on the island. Rents are too high. It's too expensive to live here. And the second one, I think, is that things like groceries, things like the everyday essentials, the cost of living, are too expensive. So I want to talk a little bit about the things Labour has already done on these issues and where we can go further and where I would advocate for Waiheke. So in terms of talking about housing, look, we have conducted, under this government, the largest build of state houses in New Zealand history since the 1950s. So that's the largest build of state houses in 70 years. That state housing build has been great, but it has not benefited all communities equally and has not benefited all communities evenly. And I think it would be fair to say that this community is one of those where we need to go further and we need to build more public housing, build more transitional housing, work with community housing providers to help on that. And so this for me is a key part of my advocacy. I alluded in my opening statement to my housing advocacy role. As a member of Gen Z, as a 25-year-old person, I am part of what we would call Generation Rent, which is to say that even though I have a very good job, I work in the tech industry, I have no realistic prospects of owning my own home. And so we need to make renting more affordable, and we need to make it better for people. And so one of the other things that we have done on this front has been to protect the rights of renters. So we've banned letting fees. We have removed no-cause evictions so that people cannot be kicked out of their rental properties without good cause. These are the sorts of things that the National Party want to bring back if they are elected at this election, and that's something that I think will be extremely detrimental to the people on this island who rent. The second thing I want to talk about, and I think I've got about another minute, is on groceries and is on the cost of living side of things. And this is, I think, a bigger picture on affordability. We have had in this country for too long a duopoly of the two big grocery providers, and in communities like this one, and in the community that I live in, which is the city centre, they are able to exploit people because there isn't that ability to have competition. In the city centre, it's because people walk, and so you can't walk to a competing supermarket, so they can charge you what you want. On Waiheke, obviously, you can't leave Waiheke to do your grocery shopping because that would be insane, so they can charge you whatever they want. The way that we are solving that, and what we are doing and what we will continue doing, is we have appointed a grocery commissioner who has legal powers in order to take on the supermarket duopoly and to encourage more competition and to make sure that Kiwis get a better deal at the supermarket. We've already seen new players come in, like Costco. I want to see more work on that. I want to see more competition. I want to make sure that people on Waiheke are getting a better deal at the checkout.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Chloe Swarbrick.
Yeah, thank you. So quite difficult, as always, just to pick this down into one issue. And I think as a Green, we're constantly always faced with the dilemma that Jeanette Fitzsimons put really concisely, which is that we currently have an economy which exploits both people and the planet. But when I go around and talk to people, it is very abundantly clear that the first pressing issue on people's mind right now is how they're going to put food on the table, how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to keep the lights on, and how they are going to ensure that their family are able to get through the next week or month. So I agree with Oscar about the point on affordability. We know full well that there are massive issues with regard to housing on this housing on this island. It is a crisis, and that is particularly profound in the inequities that we see with how increasing numbers of properties are being rented out for Airbnbs. I think there is the potential of a discussion about the likes of which we've seen in Queenstown with regard to the future of Airbnbs on the island, but just wanted to back Oscar up on the point that this is something which the Greens have also been pushing really hard for, is greater protections for renters and greater affordability. We already have forms of rent controls in the Residential Tenancies Act which prohibit increases for rents more than once per annum, and also prohibit rents being higher than what is considered market rate. The problem is that market rate is predetermined by those who landlords and property managers. So we need some level of rationality and predictability in this. And what the Greens have said is that we would not like to see those increase by more than 3% per annum. On housing as well, we do need more supply. Want to acknowledge Paul Carew from the Waiheke Housing Trust for the mahi that he's done on this over the past few years, as well as the rest of the Housing Trust, of course. But what we've seen is that there are still massive challenges with getting this stuff off the ground, and folks may have seen what ended up with the necessary sale of some of those units which were developed. With Damien, of actually your local Opportunities Party candidate, now taking over the reins on the Waiheke Housing Trust, I think that there is an enormous opportunity working with local board and Auckland Council as a whole, and have had these conversations already with the Honourable Megan Woods. If we can find council lands that Kia Ora can develop on, then we can start to get building. So there is an initial commitment, at least informally, between myself and the Minister of Housing to move forward on that. The second thing that I would say is transport, and we haven't mentioned the elephant or the P-Tom in the room. So folks will obviously be aware of the fact that under the former national government, the decision of Stephen Joyce, which was relatively inexplicable, I've got a 300-plus page OIA if anybody wants the background on this, because it was against all official advice. We ended up with that exemption to the public transport operating model. We've now had the evolution into the sustainable transport framework, which for the first time allows councils to contract their own services. The problem is that we've baked in things the way they are right now with that PTOM. So we've been working really closely with the Honourable Michael Wood and now with the Honourable David Parker and Kath as well. And we're closer than we've ever been to having the necessary evidence to be able to initiate that order in council to bring Waiheke ferry route under the heel of the new sustainable transport framework, because I very strongly believe that Waiheke locals are entitled to the same serviceability, affordability and predictability as public transport users across the rest of not only Auckland but this country.
Seems to have struck a chord. So we'll start with, many of you mentioned housing. So Susie, would you like to come forward and you've ask your question on that? She sat at the back, I don't know why. No,
it's for the radio, Susie.
You need to come to the microphone, thank you. And just to kind of give you a bit of a warning, so after housing, we'll move on to the next question I'm going to take after that. We'll hear from Alice. So if you get ready.
I'll read it out. So, kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Ko Susie Newman taku ingoa. As you can see...
Into the microphone, Susie.
Into the microphone. I'm a long-time local looking for a home. And I've been looking for one for 15 months. I'm about to get evicted from the place I'm staying in, which is a friend's place. He wants to sell it. So I've gone to Winds to ask for emergency housing. However, to qualify for emergency housing, just let me get my letter. Bless you.
Thank you.
In order to be eligible for emergency housing, you would need to have less than $1,279.35 in cash assets. And if you actually have a little bit more, and then you go to them and you say, here, look, I now have $1,279.35 in cash assets, I will need to provide verification of what I have used my assets for. Is that fair?
No.
No.
So we've got a wider question here, haven't we, about access to housing on the island and a shortfall in rental accommodation and affordability of rental accommodation. So we'll ask the candidates to address that, and some of you have already touched on that, but more specifically around these issues both of access to rental, but what happens when people lose their rental accommodation. So Oscar, we'll begin with you, and then we'll... Yep, 1.5 on this, yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's absolutely a huge issue. I mean, to your point, it's not fair. It isn't fair that happens. And there are, this is the sort of the madness of bureaucracy sometimes, is that you have these kind of cliffs where if you meet a threshold, that's it. And it shouldn't be the case. We should be delivering these core services, these core things that people need, these human rights like housing to people, in an unconditional or a more unconditional way. To your point, the way that we solve the housing crisis and the way that we get over what we have had is by building more houses. And we have had for too many years in this country, for decades and decades and decades, a mindset that housing is an investment, that housing is something that people can speculate on, and a tax code that reflects that. One of the things that we've done while we were in government is we've increased the bright line test to make to make speculation less tax advantageous, something that, of course, the National Party want to bring back if they get into government. And that has led to situations like we see on Waiheke, where speculators are in the market, they're locking out ordinary people from being able to afford their own homes. And to me, that's not good enough. To me, that means that we have failed as a society and we need to improve that. And what we have done under this government and what we want to continue doing is to continue building more homes, warm, dry, affordable homes for people. So that looks like the state housing numbers that I already talked about. It looks like record numbers of private dwellings that we've consented, and absolutely we want to continue that work if we're elected.
Okay, so yeah, and we'll pick up on that. Chloe?
Yeah, so the first thing that I think is needed to be said is that there was a piece of legislation in Parliament which was initially bipartisan accord between particularly the National and Labour parties called the Housing Enabling Legislation, but that, obviously the National Party's now backed away from it, but it also does not apply to the Hauraki Islands because the Hauraki Islands District Plan is outside of the Unitary Plan. What that means is I think that we are actually well overdue for a community-wide conversation about what kind of economy and what kind of population and what kind of conservation and what kind of island we want moving forward, because the tension that I see speaking to the likes of Whitty and our local businesses is that obviously they want employees who help to service the hospitality and tourism industry, but then we also need to have the housing which is affordable in order to place people so that they can then do the work, and the tension there also flows down into our schools and who services our health system and otherwise. So this is where, for me, the local solution is not only making sure that we build more, and I've alluded to the solutions that exist with Kia Ora in particular, but also with us addressing some of those fundamentals, because more supply solely is not going to fix this when we do have those empty houses, as folks were alluding to. I had conversations with former Mayor Phil Goff, who investigated doing a kind of rate on ghost or empty homes, but that is going to require legislative reform, and that's something which we've continued to raise with the Labour majority. They were not particularly keen on making those tax changes, as it seems many tax changes are a bit spooky at the moment for them, but it's something which we continue to put forefront of mind, because housing is a human right. It should not be a commodity to gamble on.
Mahesh, your fix for housing on the island.
Thank you. In my intro, what I was talking about was the economic, sustainable resilience of this island. That a core part of that is housing. Can you hear me clearly? Great. A core part of that is housing. As I mentioned earlier, we need to be very clear who we are as a community. What do we need? How many teachers do we need? How many doctors do we need? It is so troubling that towards the end of last year, I understand, or this year, there was a doctor that was looking to find accommodation and couldn't find accommodation here. This is absolutely unacceptable. So the first thing we need to do, as I alluded earlier, is to come up, and this is not policy-centric, and this is what I would do as an electorate MP focused on this, on Waiheke specifically, is to become very clear what are the bare bones that the community needs in regards to housing. Let's come up with that snapshot very clearly. Now, how do we solve that? What are the key challenges there? There is supply right now that is not flooding into the market. Oscar alluded to the fact that there were certain rules and certain changes from an interest deductibility perspective and a bright line perspective that the Labour Party made. Commissions and agencies told them very clearly that that would put upward pressure on prices, which is why we're changing it. So that the supply would come back into the market, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We are also going to partner
this is just a
with
giveaway
local
to rich
council.
landlords.
We are also going to partner with local council, local government to set up targets and goals. outside of this, we will have a strong social housing play.
You haven't committed to new social housing post-2025.
We will invest into community housing projects and work with other community housing projects to build more and build faster, as well as for schools as well.
Okay, so thank you. So I just want to explore a couple more things on housing. So, you talked about community housing on the island.
Yes.
One of the things that we've seen on the island is that when there is new housing development, it's top end. It's top end. It's not community housing.
It goes to the rich.
So, for each of you, thank you. So for each of you, how would you work with council to open up that housing stock for affordable housing or for housing for lower income people, rather than all the housing development being at the top end?
Yeah, let me talk about this. I think I can definitely get from the mood from the audience that there's some notion that that I'm putting forward a landlord, or there's this notion that it's landlord versus renters. I want to be very clear. Waiheke is a perfect example about the fact that an economy is an intricate, intertwined piece, that we're all in this together. Right? People have to let go of supply. We have to build in all areas. So the National Party is going to come out with a rent for build, bringing up the rent for build, bringing up the rent for build market. Bringing up the rent for build market and making sure that our teachers have places to proper investment in social housing. I will make sure, as your electorate MP, that not one teacher, one doctor, one necessary person and professional in this community is found, and every absolutely, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Working with Kath in regards to identifying the core community and making sure people have housing. And you know how you do it? You don't do it through policy. You do it by rolling up your sleeves and making sure that you're fully aware of each person and getting it done. Coming in here and getting it done. I don't hide away from policy, but coming in there.
I'm going to let the... Thank you, Robin. Robin, thank you. Okay. I'm going to let the other candidates speak on this in a sec, but I just want to come to one area of policy on housing. I looked on Trade Me today for properties for sale on Waiheke Island. There are 93. 36 are over $2 million. Another 25 are in the $1.7 to $2 million band. And we've already, seen the speculation that actually, as soon as they're able to be bought by foreign buyers, those will just jump to $2 million. You say it's not about policy, but there is a policy. How do you see that policy impacting on housing costs on Waiheke?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I talked about how the National Party will be doing city deals as we come in. And Waiheke has to be identified. That's why I framed it. Waiheke has to be identified as its unique environment, because it's an island, beautiful island environment. So I will make the argument in regards to making sure that the tax that comes through that funnels straight into the community. I will also call out that these prices need to be looked at, right? We need to make sure, my commitment to you is to make sure that the community doesn't go without housing. And my commitment to you is that as those pricing changes come through, if the pricing change comes through, that I work as your National Party Member of Parliament in a National Party-led government to be really aware how those pricings come through.
Okay, all right. So let's let the others respond to that. Chloe, we'll start with you.
Okay, so even prior to the new tax proposals from the National Party, you can look at economists like Bernard Hickey's estimations of what would occur overnight if a National Act government got in and implemented their rollback of renters' rights, the tax deductibility changes that Oscar alluded to, and the estimation is that house prices would jump 10 to 15% overnight. So these ostensible savings are not going to be passed on to first-time buyers nor to renters or tenants. So to answer the question, which is about how do we actually ensure that there is more supply, and how do we work with council to do that? Well, we roll up our sleeves, to use a turn of phrase, and we continue having the conversations that are already in train. I want to acknowledge the local board for advocating for this for several years now and for continuing to push for more of that supply to come on stream. But what my conversations with the Minister have outlined is that what we need to do is precisely identify those areas that we need this development to happen. And there are some that I've been having conversations with, the likes of, and also with our Deputy Chair, Bianca Ranson, about potentially looking at where we had what was supposed to be an 18-hole golf course and there's now 9, that there's maybe a little bit of land there, as well as in a few other places, the likes of the school. So nonetheless, there are opportunities here to identify that land and then to move forward with tangible opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you. Oscar.
Yeah, I mean, this policy area actually has a little bit of a personal angle for me. My grandmother, who was or is a classic Waiheke hippie, did not have insurance for her house, and it burned down. And the result of that was, firstly, that my parents had to significantly financially assist her. But the second thing was that she could no longer live in this community, that she could no longer live on this island because house prices had increased, and that meant that she had to move up to Northland, and I no longer see her as often as I would if she were here in this campaign, probably in this room tonight cheering me on. So that's the personal angle for me in this, is that there are too many people in this community who leave here because they no longer can afford to live here. In terms of responding to what Mahesh said, because I think we can't let him get away with the lies that he was just spreading there.
Excuse me. Sorry, what lies? Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Were you advised,
absolutely.
was the Labour Party advised that if you change the interest deductibility and the bright line test, that there would be upward pressure on prices? Were they advised, yes or no?
I don't believe that they were. But
they were.
The point, I mean, what Chloe has just pointed out to you is that
because it takes away quantity and quality of supply, which is exactly what happened.
No, they don't. Because
which is why
you have to draw a distinction
between $185 price increase happened.
Mahesh, shut up and let me speak. You have to draw a distinction between speculation and between housing investment and investment in new build housing. These are two completely different things. When you think about people trading houses with each other, sitting on land and waiting for the value to appreciate and then not paying their fair share of taxes on it, that's very different from someone who, and they are exempted under the current tax code, wants to build new houses for people. These are two different cases, and the National Party want to treat them as the same thing because they want to give away tax breaks to rich landlords. Look, the second component of this is to talk about our state housing bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So
Can I just finish that point? Sorry, very quickly. The other point is on state housing. He wanted to talk about social housing. They have not committed to a new state housing program beyond 2025. Chris Bishop is up there in the national media saying that he wants people in Kaingaora to be sacked and to lose their jobs, and they want to roll back the scale of the social housing build in this country. We can't afford that, this community can't afford that, and the country can't afford that.
Okay, thank you. All right. Some good
Chris,
lively debate on local issues.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to later on. You're going to have time to sum up
Sure.
and come back. I do want to move on to some other issues. So, Alice, can you make your way to the microphone, please? Going to take another question, and candidates, you will have the chance to respond at the end.
Kia ora tata. Thank you for coming to Waiheke. I'm going to pivot to our bigger planetary home and focus the conversation away from housing here, but actually the big old ocean that actually encompasses this island that we live in. So there's a range of issues, and I'm sure you're aware we're at kind of the brink of ecological collapse. And, you know, we have seen many of our species in the Hauraki Gulf be classed as functionally extinct. And I guess my question to you is, as your parties, what are some of the concrete policy actions that are going to translate into upholding our obligation, our collective obligation, both as tangata tiriti and tangata whenua here, to actually integrate mātauranga Māori and the fantastic ecological wisdom that we have in informing our ocean policies and our environmental policy more broadly?
Now, I've got to remember who I'm up to start.
And then can I just add a little moment of speak about Kalupa if you'd like. And how are you going to resource local community?
Okay, they'll probably just need to stick to the one.
Integrated.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we were up to Oscar starting on this one, is that right?
I started on the last one, yeah.
Okay, so Chloe, you can start.
Here, go. A minute? 30? 1.5. Okay, cool. So firstly, just Alice, thank you for the work that you do within Waiheke Marine Project. Also want to shout out to Ngāti Paoa for their leadership with the Rahui 2 odd years ago now. But as you've just alluded to, we currently have the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act, which has been in place for 20 odd years. And basically all that does is empower the Hauraki Gulf Forum to put forward a report every 3 or so years telling us how much worse things have gotten while we have not implemented the requisite protections. So we had the Sea Change report in 2016, which said that we need to ban bottom trawling and we need to get on with marine protected areas. The Greens policy position has been for a really long time for at least 30%, but what we've seen with the recent moves, the reason that we haven't done it is we've had a majority Labour government and the Greens have continued pushing for what we have managed to achieve, which is about 16% protection. So there is more to do here. Same with ending bottom trawling, which is related to your point around Kalupa brachypus, because we should be taking a preventative approach here. First discovered on Aotea Great Barrier Island, not by Biosecurity New Zealand, but by 2 kayakers, have been working with the local board out there and with Mana Whenua on rolling out greater protections. But what we've seen is that on the best estimation, MPI and Biosecurity have invested $3 million into it. Now with it being discovered here on Waiheke, if you were to contrast that with the response that Biosecurity New Zealand had to Mycoplasma bovis, that was a better part of $1 billion. What the Greens have proposed in our recent oceans policy is for hundreds of millions more dollars to be invested into protecting our oceans and eradicating Kalupa brachypus, and we can do it if we fix our tax system.
Mahesh Muralidhar.
Sure. A few things. First of all, apologies for getting a little bit excited. I didn't really appreciate being
We
told.
want our politicians to be excited.
Sure. Getting a little bit too excited for my taste, to be honest. I don't like it when someone calls me a liar, and it's completely false.
Okay, so
right?
let's answer the question.
Two.
Yep.
Second, importantly, the Labour Party, the government, came out recently with forking out 19% of Hauraki Gulf in regards to Marine Reserve. We are fully supportive of this. This is it's bipartisan in many ways. And as your local electorate MP, as part of that city deal, I would be keen on seeing if we can increase that, if we can push that, right? Our Marine Reserve and Waiheke's identity as a eco force is critical. You have my complete guarantee that I will be right there with you in regards to fighting for that.
Can I just add a total minute? The question was actually specifically around concrete actions in your policies.
So, like I just said, we would not do we would support the changes that have been made in regards to Marine Reserve around Hauraki Gulf. So you would see that carried on. Outside of that, as I mentioned with the city deal, I would want to negotiate to see if we can carve out more space, more percentage of the Hauraki Gulf for the Marine Reserve.
Thank you. So, Oscar?
We can have a chat.
So I think Mahesh's answer is telling, because they had a local MP who wore a blue rosette in this seat for 9 years, and Nikki Kay, she did a lot of good work, but she did not pass the sort of Gulf protections and sort of marine protections that we have seen under this Labour government. And I think that speaks to the priorities of the two different blocks, or the two different parties in this election, if you like. We have done this, despite the fact that, Chloe, who we can work with, is a Green MP.
Let's go further and faster, Oscar.
Sure. But we have done this and have tripled the amount of marine protection in the Gulf. It's a great start. I think the mood of this room is probably that these changes don't go far enough, and I'm with you on that. I think there is more work to do, and there is always more work to do when it comes to environmental protection, and absolutely I would be an advocate for that. But again, to my original point, if you look at the differences between the parties, I think that work is a lot easier to do when you are a Labour MP advocating a Labour government versus a National MP advocating a national government, because we had that, and none of this happened. None of this discussion got to even the point that it is now under them. The other more broad point here to talk about oceans is actually that this is something that's dramatically and drastically affected by climate change.
Yep.
We have taken climate change seriously under this government. We passed the Zero Carbon Act. We have. We absolutely have. We have, for the first time in this country's history, taken climate change seriously and passed the Zero Carbon Act. Again, there's more work to do on that. That is not something you will get under Mahesh or a national government.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
So I'm going to ask a question about ferries in a moment, and then after that I'm going to take questions from Kath and from Fiona, so just letting you know. So transport and ferry fares are a major issue on the island. And it's been something that's been contentious for a long time. So first of all, from each of you, what I'd like to know is, do you believe that the ferry route should be part of the public transport network?
Yes.
And also, how would you go about achieving that? Because this is something that people have been working on for years. We're still not there. So I think we must be starting with Mahesh this time.
Correct. Oscar can talk all he wants about policy and what's happened in the past. The outcomes of today are this Labour Green government, right? The outcomes in regards to 6 years of not having yet resolved the Waiheke ferry issue, and I am committing to you that within you had 6 years of government and an associate transport minister that was Green. This still hasn't changed. I am committing to you within the first year, if I am your electorate MP, I will resolve this. The two options are through competition or getting out of the government framework. I have spoken to the prospective Transport Minister, Simeon Brown, and I've said, hey man, this is not okay. The situation where so many residents in a part of New Zealand are having unequitable transport situation is not okay. So we have to start from that base principle and we have to address it. And the two ways are either put it under the government framework or find competition. And I will make sure that within the first year that this is done. This is my commitment to you.
They signalled that they wanted to bring it into the public transport operating model, and Mahesh is correct, it hasn't happened. So what would you do to speed that along? Is it still your position that it should be, and how would you make that happen?
Yes. Okay, so I think first it's worth looking at the history here, because maybe Mahesh doesn't know it. Maybe Mahesh doesn't know it. I know you know it. But it's worth pointing out that a national government amalgamated Auckland Council and led to the disaster
You've
in
had
local government.
6 years to do so many things.
That we
Let's
currently
talk
have.
about your record.
The National Party created the public transport
In regards
operating
to
model.
social housing, transport, and a range of things. Your record.
This is how Oscar proposes to fix it.
Yes, yeah. So
I don't think Kiwi Build is going to fix the ferry service. For listeners, that was an interjection from the
And
from
our
audience.
campaign managers
So,
don't need to
Oscar,
be yelling from the floor.
To be fair to Oscar, let's give Oscar his
So
go here.
we do support this, and this is why we have changed the public transport operating model. We are abolishing it and replacing it with the new model, and that will allow things like public ownership of the ferries. We had in the past a situation where the government was legally disallowed from owning the assets.
Mm-hmm.
That was introduced under the previous national government, and it has been a disaster. And we now have the situation where Fullers can effectively blackmail or hold everyone to ransom because they own the asset. So that needs to change. The thing here is basically that this is a legally dubious area of policy.
Yeah.
So ramming this through in a way that allows the operator to sue the government and to take legal action against us won't fix the issue. It will essentially create a worse problem where we are then stuck in a legal mire and we can't actually get the outcome that we want. So we have to proceed carefully.
So Chloe, you've been the MP for the last 3 years. You have been working on this. Mm-hmm. It's not fixed.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say that the honest truth is that it is really, really, really bloody complicated and difficult, and Kath can back me up on this. No, the reality is that we have an anomaly here where we have the only transport route in the entire country that is identified by the local authority as necessary and integral to the public transport of the city, but excluded under legislation from being included within the way that Auckland Transport negotiates public transport provision within the city. That is a consequence of a decision made by the former national government, and it has created massive legal challenges for how we go about undoing that. So Auckland Transport has been advocating since 2019 for this exemption and this for the removal of this exemption. So working on this really closely with, again, the former Minister, the Honourable Michael Wood, he went about commissioning a piece of advice which unfortunately he considered to not be good enough. I then put forward a bunch of parliamentary written questions to see if he had undertaken any of the many-fold recommendations from that initial consultant's report. Unfortunately, he hadn't, much to my frustration and the frustration of the local board. So we OIA'd that report and we got it 6 months later, after which there'd already been so much time churned up. We now have finally in formal letters, which again, this is unfortunately the role that we have to play as we go through literal legal processes to undo a contract, which otherwise would expose the government to tens of millions of dollars in liability through the court system. We have to do this properly. So we're expecting Waka Kotahi to make a final recommendation for the Order and Council process to remove that exemption in the next few months of the next term of the government incoming subsequent to this election. And that is based on 3 years of really, really bloody hard work.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to we had some discussion there of work that's happened in conjunction with the local board. The relationship between the local board, the councillor, the mayor and the MP is very important. Local board chair Kath Hanley is here to ask about that.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Kath Hanley Takurunga, chair of the local board. I've met you all. I've worked with Chloe for the last few years. Before I start, I would like to say that I'm pretty unimpressed by your grasp of a lot of core information that relates to our moana, for instance. It is not suddenly moving to, I think it was 19% protection. It's moving from less than 1% to approximately 6%.
Proper protection, yeah.
Proper protection. And science says that it will take 30% protection to return the health of the Hauraki Gulf. So way too little. I applaud the fact that we're at least moving to 6, but we're just working on our response to that bill, and in fact we had to get it in today. So that is a problem. It is Waka Kotahi that has dragged the chain and has, I think, defeated the process, but they're in a position now probably where they're going to have to actually deal with this issue and make a recommendation to the Minister. And Auckland Transport has, throughout this, supported the Waiheke Local Board. So it has taken all of those years. So that's just a bit of background, but important to us that we actually get this sorted. Waiheke is absolutely in despair, not just housing, not just the cost of living. It is the cost of transport, every which way you look. So I am really interested, because it behoves the board, regardless of who's chair, to work closely with our MP. But the locals also have 2 other elected representatives. They have 5 local board members. They have a member of the governing body of council, and they have the mayor, who they did or did not vote for. Strangely, quite a few people who voted seem to have gone underground in those first few months. So 2 parts to my question. How would you differentiate between the agendas of those political entities with whom you also will form a working relationship if you haven't so far? And how would you prioritise the local board's position? Because that is not necessarily the same as the governing bodies. In fact, we fight enormous battles all of the time to get our issues presented, let alone to persuade policymakers to move. So that's the first part. And secondly, having read the Waiheke Local Board plan, we've dealt with housing, we've dealt with moana, and we've dealt with ferries. Of our priorities, which are fully consulted with the public here, what of those priorities are you committed to, and what would you do? What would you see as key priorities in that local board plan? Thank you.
Right, big question, Kat. So
These are big issues.
Yeah, so
These are issues for us, which frankly, you know, the amounts of work that we have to do to get relationships and just advocate, because we do not have numbers. Numbers equal political power.
Right, so let's hear from the candidates. So we've got the relationship between those different groups and where you see alignment between your priorities and the local board priorities. So, Oscar.
Thanks for your question, Kath. I agree with you, and I think that we have had a long-standing issue in Auckland of a poor working relationship between central and local government, and I want that to change because I think it holds back progress in our city, and it has been the cause of a number of problems. To your point about the different priorities at the different levels of local government, I absolutely hear you. I mean, the other local board that covers Auckland Central plus a little bit more is the Waitemata local board, and of course they have a very similar thing where the priorities of that local board are different from the priorities in the governing body and different again from the priorities of the mayor, and so that working relationship of course has been complicated as well. So I hear you on that, and I think I see the role of a local MP as someone who can mediate between those different priorities and who can say, you know, effectively you are the spokesperson for the political issues of Auckland Central or you know, of Waiheke. And that is because you get the most media time, you get the most attention, you get the most opportunity to brief the press, and so you get the opportunity to talk about these priorities that you've discussed in the local board plan. And so I see myself, I would say, aligned with you on pretty much all of those, and would, of course, use the bully pulpit of politics to be able to advocate for those. So that's, I guess, the working relationship that I see. But I think that we shouldn't also exclude the governing body. We shouldn't exclude the other elements of that. Look, I didn't vote for the mayor, but you have to work with him. He is the mayor. He's very fond of saying lots of people voted for him. And in terms of the governing body, look, I've spent a lot of time building relationships there. Housing policy is, of course, a local government issue, and so spent a lot of time lobbying them on that.
Thank you. Chloe.
So wanted to acknowledge that there are 3 local boards that we work with and that I've had the privilege of working with over the last 3 years. So Waitemata, you guys here on Waiheke, and also Aotea, Great Barrier, and I have a very good working relationship with Genevieve Sage as the chair on Waitemata local board, and with Izzy, who I know you also very much work closely with within the Hauraki Islands District Plan, and also with the similarities and differences within the island. We also obviously have Councillor Mike Lee, and then we have the governing body, as you've just alluded to. I know full well that you work as constructively as is possible with the current mayor to try and get the outcomes that are necessary for our community here on this island. And I think that there was a really clear example of the ability to be both a critic and a conscience throughout the austerity budget proposals process, right? And speaking to your point around how the numbers don't lie and the numbers are where the power is at, Waiheke represents approximately 1% of the population of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, but we had 2% of the submissions. And that was because of how much this island cares about this stuff. And when we looked at the threat to the discretionary budget of Waiheke Local Board, that was one, as well as the likes of our CABs and our community facilities and services, that was precisely why I saw it as my role to rally behind submissions and driving Aucklanders to care about and to acknowledge. And we ended up getting the largest number of submissions to an annual budget that we've ever seen since the Super City. I tried to rally the 40 plus different MPs that are both electorate and list within our parliament, and found next to no appetite. And unfortunately, that's because I see that when it is convenient, far too many MPs will back away from something and say it's a council issue, but when they feel as though they can score some political points, will stick their beak in. I will be consistent the whole way through, and I think I've proved that in my working relationship with you.
Okay, Mahesh.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Kat, for everything you do. I'm aware that Waiheke is in a challenging position because of its situation. I talked earlier about how the National Party, when in government, is going to do city deals. It's why I framed the conversation earlier on in regards to being very clear about what are the strategic requirements for the island. I would want to negotiate that straight away in the first 3 months. We need to be very clear about the amount of governance that this island needs, and I would push very, very hard for Waiheke to have as much autonomy as possible in regards to working through this. I'm someone who is, I would say, far more an entrepreneur and a problem solver than a politician. And at the end of the day, what matters most is the outcomes that you get, right? So I want to really understand and make sure, which is why as a National Party MP in a National Party-led government, I am communicating clearly to you when I say, I will have this addressed in a year. I don't make those in regards to the ferry situation. I am saying that with incredible conviction. Mismanaging expectations is not the way. I have built a very strong track record. So you have my complete backing that I will be right with you in making sure that Waiheke is represented incredibly well, and that we set up a long-term sustainable economic framework for Waiheke.
Okay, thank you. And I think it would be interesting to come back later and perhaps kind of find out a little bit more about the ability to have impact on government as a backbencher.
May I just ask, Mahesh, how long do you think it often takes legislation to pass through the House?
I don't know, Chloe, why don't you tell me?
Well, I'm asking you because you're making promises to fulfill within a year.
I am, because the party has said that in the first 100 days we are going to do these city deals, right? So, and I appreciate that I will, if I get the chance to serve, we will be part of government. So things will be fairly fluid. So I trust we will be able to make moves.
No, my question was, do you understand the average amount of time that it takes to pass legislation? Because I think that it is actually a massive disservice to the community to put arbitrary timeframes on things when you don't understand how long it takes laws to pass through Parliament.
I think the time it takes for laws to pass through Parliament, it changes depending on context.
What's the average time that it takes for a law to pass through Parliament?
I presume it takes anywhere from 3 months to 24 months.
Yeah, thereabouts, but typically between 9 months to 12 months.
Great. So it's also reflective of the kind of capacity and capability of the Member of Parliament and how much they can drive for change. And I'm committing, given my track record, that I will drive for change and make sure that this community is set up sustainably.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move to our next question. And just remember, candidates, you do need to speak into the microphones. Fiona Gregory.
I'm going to
just bend that microphone up so you're pointing at you. Yeah.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit here. I am the mum of a teenager who's been experiencing mental distress for the past 5 years. Thank you. I've seen firsthand that Aotearoa's mental health system is not working and that change is urgently needed. For people with a mental illness on Waiheke, our local health centres are totally under-resourced and understaffed. They do the best that they can, absolutely, and there are some wonderful people working in those centres, but it's not enough. Yeah. And services in Auckland have impossible wait lists. And on top of that, of course, we have our expensive and time-consuming ferry trip to attend appointments in town. So what ends up happening here is that our local police are the first-line responders to mental health crises. We have no local mental health crisis team. Local police hand over to city police, meaning that too many distressed or suicidal people end up taken to the emergency room, handcuffed on the deodar and in the cell of a police van, often only to be discharged from ER in the middle of the night into Grafton and back into the care of their families. I have been through that situation myself with my son. We clearly need to do things differently. So I would really like to hear from you three what you would do to make sure that early intervention and prevention programs are available for Waiheke residents. And what would you do to make sure that we have an effective crisis response on the island that acknowledges that mental health is a health issue, not a crime?
Kia ora.
Thank you. So, sorry, I've lost track again. I believe we started
I
with
went
Oscar.
first last time.
I think it's now me. Yeah, cool. Kia ora, Fiona. Thank you for that question. So so much to be said and can kind of scale up from a national level, where we know that Kia Oranga, the Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry Commission, tabled last term of Parliament, basically told us that all of us have genetics which make us more or less predisposed towards the potential manifestation of mental ill health or addiction, but it's our circumstances, our environment, the opportunities that we have access to, and those that we are blocked from accessing, which can turn those variables up or down a notch. So that's the preventative stuff that you're speaking about, right? If we want to ensure that people have good mental health and well-being, then we need to ensure that families have the opportunity to have a stable, affordable home and can put food on the table. So the Greens have policies at a national level to address this through an income guarantee and those kind of our pledge to renters. With regard to services on the island, this is something that I've been talking extensively to Whaihuhana about, in particular, around the opportunities for us to collaborate between the Hauora at Piritahi Marae and the Health Trust to see if there's an opportunity for a pilot program. The barrier that we do have to making this happen is that we have to scope it up as a community and be really clear about what it is that we want. That then enables us to try and get the funding avenues available. So that's something which we are currently in train and looking at doing. We'll be completely upfront with you about the fact that the election being on has meant that some of that work has been delayed somewhat. With regard to the fact that right now police remain the major kind of call out, this is something which I was gutted was delayed from the work program in mental health, which was a review of the Mental Health Act, which currently has those compulsory treatment and assessment orders, which does make the police the first line of contact. So again, this is something which we can address if we get on with the work that was supposed to occur, but COVID stymied.
Mahesh?
Sorry, it was Phoebe, wasn't it? Fiona. Fiona, thank you so much for being brave to share that story and bringing this issue to light. This is really important to the National Party. Matt Ducey, the current mental health spokesperson, will be the first ever Minister of Mental Health that New Zealand's known, as well as will be in cabinet. So we are taking mental health very seriously, so you can take some provision in regards to that. We will set aside a separate fund specific for mental health. Outside of this, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a key part of the critical skills, professions that we need in this community. And again, I want to make sure that's charted out and that's stated loud and clear as the National Party works out in regards to, hey, what are the core services that we need in Waiheke? With the adequate representation, I will fight to make sure that we have the right immigration professionals, immigrants coming into Waiheke that could address these issues, because right now there's a serious shortage of mental health skills within New Zealand, right? So we've got to set up we have to set up the right pathways for these skills to come here and stay here. So a couple of things there. In regards to mental health, we will have the first Minister of Mental Health. He would be in cabinet. We need to make sure the skills come into the island. One last thing, we will have a social investment program that we will chart out, and where we identify community organizations that we will invest into so that we can scale them up. And I'm keen to understand what opportunities there are in Waiheke, as well as close by in the mainland, that we can power up so that we can provide services appropriately.
Oscar.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely hear you on this issue. I mean, I am someone who has had challenges with these things myself in the past, and the access in this country, unless you are at full crisis point, getting prioritised is impossible. It's insanely difficult, and there's absolutely more work to do in this. I don't think anyone on the stage is going to say, the defence of the mental health system as it exists is adequate, because it clearly is not. I think I make a couple of points here. I mean, I think the first is, we are working on that first line of defence. So that's things like delivering 1 million mental health counselling sessions in the last 6 years as part of that program. Again, there's more work to do there, but that is, I think, the sort of the first line of defence is making sure that people get into the mental health care system. I was talking to an entrepreneur who was someone who works on digital mental health, so creates services that you can use electronically to deal with mental health, and he was saying that something like only 30% of people ever actually get into the system, and that the vast majority of people, to your point, are dealt with by the police or are left to suffer in silence or are not engaged with the system in some other way. And so that number needs to change, and that number needs to improve. I think fundamentally mental health is an issue of funding. We are committed to increasing the funding for mental health. To Mahesh's point, there are workforce issues. We want to train more mental health professionals in New Zealand and make sure that we can expand the size of the workforce here in New Zealand. Yes, maybe that will involve immigration, but that shouldn't be the only thing that we rely on. And we want to pay these people more so that they stay in the mental health profession and actually continue working in New Zealand and involved in our system. Sorry.
Thank you.
Big question.
Yeah, they are they are big questions, and it's limited time, and I think we all acknowledge that and appreciate the efforts you're making to get through and give us a sense of your way forward. I want to ask about the island economy and business. So this is an economy which is diverse. Obviously, there's a heavy reliance on tourism that has impacts on workforce. So we have, despite what you might think as you travel around the island and see all these huge houses, we actually have very low median income in comparison to wider Auckland. So there's many people on low incomes with uncertain work. We also have businesses that are reliant on people being able to get over from town to participate in. So, it's a fairly wide question really, but about what you see as the priorities for an economy that provides some balance and support, both for business and for the people who work here. I've completely failed in my duty of keeping track of whose turn it is. Sorry, Mahesh.
Yeah, this is, again, going back to what I said earlier. We need to have a clear view of how we can set Waiheke up from a resilience perspective, economic resilience. A key part of that is making sure that we have enough good-paying jobs. So what are ideas we could try out? How do we charge tourists coming to the island premium? Is there a way to think about when they come, and can we push up the price point of a various set of businesses? At Waiheke Market, can we charge tourist prices? And we need to investigate that so that then we can capture that higher pricing into the community. Outside of this, the National Party has come out with a digital nomad visa, where we can we will invite digital nomads to come into New Zealand to set up and pass on skills. I would love to see a couple or a few digital agencies propagate in the island, which would then pass on skills to local residents and local communities so that they can pick up new vocations, for example, whether it be social media marketing, etc., that they can use that globally. There are also online platforms like Upwork, Freelancer, etc., where we can train local residents up so that they can charge even more and provide services globally. So these are ways we can push up the salary of people in the island so that there is even more resilience for the community and for every single person in this island.
Thank you. Oscar, your take on island economy and incomes?
Yeah, this is one of the most deprived, most deprived area in Auckland, as far as I understand. And I think that presents a bit of a catch-22 on this island, right? You have an economy that is so highly dependent on tourism, but also an industry that, create social problems. We've already talked about some of those tonight, things like housing and, of course, the issues with things like ferries and transportation as well. So it's a very difficult trade-off. I know that they're dealing with the same sorts of issues in Queenstown at the moment, that kind of striking that balance between economic development while also maintaining the kind of character of the area and making sure that this place is for locals and maintaining the unique culture that exists on Waiheke. I think just to sort of draw out a little thread about tourism, and I'll make this answer short, there has been a post-COVID recognition by this government that the sort of tourism model that we've had in this country hasn't worked. And that is to say that it hasn't been sustainable enough. And I know my counterpart in the Māori seat, Penny Henare, who's the Minister of Tourism, has done work in this term of government to look at the ways that we can make the tourism industry in New Zealand more sustainable and more receptive to the needs of communities. We kind of have an opportunity now as the sort of tourism industry ramps back up to actually look at that and to say, is this model sustainable? Is this model serving communities the best? I think the answer on Waiheke is not always the case that has been in the past. So something that we absolutely need to think about.
Thank you. Chloe.
So something really important to know about our immigration system and about visas and other ways, knowing this really profoundly, having worked with many on the island, particularly our South American friends, and need to say here that did a lot of work with the Argentinian ambassador and our Minister of Immigration to double the immigration visa for those from Argentinian backgrounds. But what that did, not only set up issues for our football team, as in their ability, but it also actually laid really bare the issue that we have where you can't simply say that we're going to enable greater immigration here and that those people are directly and immediately going to flow into a specific geographical location, especially if you do not have the housing or the job opportunities for them. We know that we also have quite a substantive issue with the invisible kind of economy, the under-the-table payments that also currently occur. And this is where, again, we need to start to have these discussions in a really open manner about the kind of economy that we want moving forward. So to the point that Oscar was making around what initially was proposed by the Greens in the 2017 election called the Taonga levy, and then we managed to get that through in the last term of government, watered down somewhat, but it's a, I think, $40 to $50 odd fare that people who are coming into the country now pay, which half of it is ring-fenced towards conservation. I believe half of it goes to local authorities. That is something which now Aotea Great Barrier is looking at doing for visitors to the island. Obviously, they have slightly easier ways of identifying who those visitors are than we might do here, but I think that it is something which is worthy of looking at, especially if the pilot works well over there.
Thank you. I'm going to give the candidates a kind of time to give us a kind of final address in a moment, but just before we do that, I'm just going to ask each of you to comment on what you've most disagreed about tonight that you've heard from the other candidates. Right? So what is it that's come up that you've just thought, that is rubbish? And I believe this time we're starting with with Oscar.
I think it's me.
Yes.
Oh, this is a bit of a downer to end on, isn't it?
We'll go.
Despite the tenor of some of the discussion, I actually quite like these two, and I've enjoyed the sort of 15 or so debates that we've had during this campaign. But I guess the thing that we disagreed on, me and Mahesh, the most was the stuff around housing and around the tax deductibility changes. So, look, party vote Labour at this election for a government that will not give tax breaks to landlords and fund it and tax cuts to the rich, but for a party that will actually meaningfully tackle the housing crisis by building more houses.
I think the thing that I've found the most challenging throughout actually pretty much all of the 15 debates and this one tonight as well is just the honest conversation about how we practically go about making these things happen, right? Because all of us can talk about rolling up our sleeves and give whatever rhetoric and arbitrary timeframes or whatever else, but I think I would like to say you only have to look at my track record of finding creative, constructive ways through issues and like a dog with a bone chasing them until we manage to get somewhere close to success and then finally across the line to that point of success. That requires ongoing pressure on every possible decision maker and that collaboration at a local and a central government level. And that's the thing that I've always valued about my home and community of Auckland Central, right? We value independent thought. We value creative and constructive ways of going about trying to solve problems. We don't value those who stick closely to their party line. And that's why I joined the Greens, because I do not have any obsession with climbing up the pole or finding my place with a platform or a title or whatever else. I'm interested in fighting tooth and nail every single day for the solutions that our community deserves.
So you've kind of, each of you have kind of veered into your final address territory.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
But that's okay. Well, yes, Mahesh, sorry.
So
it's kind of like 6 out of 10 for the content.
So the thing I disagree with the most is I think the outcomes that this Labour Greens coalition has resulted has been terrible, right? The outcomes in regards to waiting lists, outcomes in regards to close to $100 billion deficit for the country, interest that we have to pay back, outcomes in regards to crime, outcomes in regards to social housing. And that needs to be acknowledged. So when we talk about past things that the national government has done, I found it very frustrating and challenging hearing, hey, this happened 6 years ago, this happened 6 years ago, when as a person, as a Kiwi, as an Aucklander, what I first want to hear is, hey, things suck and we messed up. And I really wanted to hear that. And it's been really hard sitting here and not hearing that. Moving forward, I've talked about being your National Party Member of Parliament, your electorate MP, fighting really hard for Waiheke, fighting really hard, focused on addressing your problems regardless of party position, regardless of party policy. And I called out that I see Waiheke as an autonomous economy, that when someone rolls up their sleeves and pushes policy aside, can solve the problems in regards to mental health on the island, can solve the problems in regards to skill set and economies, can set up a long-term sustainable economy, as I said, I'm committing to you that the ferry situation will be resolved within the year.
It'll be because we've already done the work. Just saying. No, but we have. We've set things up so that Waka Kotahi can finally make the legislative recommendation. It's literally how the law works, and Stephen Joyce set it up. No, you can OIA it. I can also give you the 300-odd pages of advice that Stephen Joyce went against.
All right. So I want to thank the candidates this evening. First of all, I want to thank you all for standing. It is really something to kind of put yourself forward to serve your community in that way. So whichever of you is successful, we thank you for doing that, and thank you for the commitment and effort you've made, as I say, to serve your community. Thank you for showing up tonight and sharing your views. Each of the three candidates on stage, Oscar Sims, Mahesh Muralidhar and Chloe Swarbrick, all have also been into Waiheke Radio for longer interviews. So you can check out our website. There's interviews with each of them there where we explore many of these issues in a bit more depth. I also want to acknowledge we've got Damien Sycamore here, who's the top candidate for Auckland Central. You can check out an interview with him on that website as well. We also have interviews with candidates who are standing for the Tamaki Makaurau electorate, which of course our island is part of as well. So do please check that out. Early voting begins on Monday. There are a number of polling places around the island. Waiheke is an interesting part of an interesting electorate. This is an electorate that in 1993 moved from very, very long period of Labour to an alliance seat, and then since MMP has been held by Labour, National and Green. And Waiheke within that electorate often has a voter turnout much higher than the rest of the electorate, and often has a party vote which differs from the rest of the electorate. So which I think reflects the unique nature of our community, and hence our focus tonight on local issues. Being geographically isolated means we are different. We do have different needs, we do have unique needs, and we need someone who's going to advocate for those on our behalf and with us. So whichever of you is successful, that's our request.
Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
And that pretty much concludes the great Waiheke Radio Auckland Central Electorate Candidates Debate. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us online or in the theatre.